It's a privilege to present our next presenter, Sarah Horton. She is interested in exploring ways to improve quality of life through good design. She is a friend and a colleague and part of our TPG family. She serves as our Director of Accessible User Experience and Design. She works with companies and product teams to create born accessible digital products and services that work well for everyone. She is co-author of the recently published A Web for Everyone with Whitney Quesenbery and Web Style Guide with Patrick Lynch. Sarah, it's yours.
Thanks very much, Deb. And hi, everyone. Um, I'll be speaking today about some work that we've been doing through TPG involving people with disabilities in UX research. And Deb already kind of filled you in on who I am, but I started at TPG about a year ago and am helping to build out the accessible user experience services with David Sloan, my colleague, and UX research is one of the primary things that we are looking at building out. So the insights and experience that I'm presenting today are from a small number of tests and activities that we've engaged in. It's the favorite part of my job is doing this work. So I think we have some really good stuff to share. I'm sure that there's a lot more that we'll be learning over the next years as we do more and more of this work. And I would love to hear from you all about the good work you're doing in this area as well. One note that if you have questions and you put them in the Q&A, I might be able to see them as we go and answer them. But otherwise, just Deb can barge in and I'll stop periodically to look at questions. So as I mentioned, we've been doing some work, some studies with that involve people with disabilities. And so what I want to share today are 10 practical insights that we've gained through these activities. They're just, well, practical. And then, so we've done contextual inquiry interviews, we've done usability studies. And then from those, we gained some design insights. And that's kind of my favorite part to talk about, because when you engage in user research, you learn so many things that you wouldn't otherwise know. And so these are design insights that we would not have really been aware of had we not sat down with people and watched them work and asked questions about what they were doing and what they were trying to accomplish. So we'll start with the practical insights. And we'll start with the insights from the contextual inquiry interviews. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background about this particular project in just a moment. But what the interviews are is observing users in their own environment and listening and asking questions and audio recording the interviews and taking notes. That's how we perform them. And what they were really helpful for was so that we could learn different ways that people work and understand the issues that people encounter in their work and identify opportunities for improvement. And I think that is an aspect that's very different from other UX research. With the interviews, you're not only trying to identify what is not working, but you're also finding ways to improve the overall user experience for people with disabilities. And then we got these really good results on this particular project. And I'll just give you a little bit of background about the project. We were working with the MBTA, and they've given us permission to talk about our project with them. So we did contextual inquiry interviews with about 10 people in December of this past year. And we did those interviews prior to doing an audit of their website. And so it was really cool because we had these interviews and the results from those interviews and the insights that we had gained through those interviews, and that those insights informed the audit test plan. So it helped us decide which tasks to focus on that were going to be most impactful on improving the user experience for people with disabilities. So that was one huge benefit to doing them at prior to doing an audit. They gave us an opportunity to bring people into our reporting. So oftentimes when we do audits, we're writing up issues and we're writing about the impact that these issues have on people. But in this case, we were actually able to bring in first-person perspectives on the specific issues and makes it a more persuasive argument for repairing the issues that are discovered in the audit. And the other thing that we discovered is that we were able to present issues that would not have been identified in an audit, and that's what we'll go over when we look at the design insights. There were things that we learned that if we had done just a straight up audit of the application of the website in this case, we would not have necessarily flagged some of the issues that we identified through the interviews, and we were able to identify those and report on those. So the insights are like this. One thing is you got to be ready to go to people where they are. And so in the case of this study, it was in December, it was in Boston. And Boston really doesn't know very well what to do with snow. So the first thing is to wear the right footwear, which I really didn't do. I had boots on, but they had no tread, and it was very precarious as I went around. But we did the interviews in two different locations. We went to the MBTA offices, and we also went to the Boston Center for Independent Living. And in both those cases, they were offices and locations that people had been to before or worked. In some cases, some people that we were interviewing worked in those locations. So they were places that people were familiar with. Another insight was just in one case, one of the participants asked me to meet him at the subway stop, at the T stop, and walk him to the Boston Center for Independent Living offices. And just for me, it was also just learning how to be a guide for someone who is blind. And so learning how to just offer your elbow as a guide to get somebody who can't see from one place to another. Another thing is to take lots of notes and have multiple modes for recording. So what I did was I had Evernote open, and I was taking notes as people talked and showed me things, but I also had my phone doing a memo, a voice memo recording, and I also had QuickTime running, recording that, because you have this great opportunity to hear directly from people who are affected by accessibility issues and also who are looking for digital technologies to improve things for them. And all of these great ideas are flying around, and if you don't capture them somehow, they're gone. So I'm a big fan of multiple redundancy in terms of recording. And then another thing that I hadn't really thought about in advance, but became very clear as I was doing these interviews was, you know, a lot of times we weren't talking about the website, and we were talking about other things having to do with moving from one place to another within the Boston area. And for example, in one case, I was interviewing two people who are deaf, and they, you know, could manage the website, okay, there are like aggravating usability issues with it, but nothing that I would say posed a huge barrier. There were some communications that went out through video as the communications medium, and obviously those weren't accessible if they weren't captioned. But they had lots to say about how difficult transport is because a lot of the notifications are audible and they're not visible. And so they'll get on a train that's an express train and not hear the announcement that it's an express train, and suddenly, they're 2 stops away from where they wanted to get off because the train was express and didn't stop at their stop. Or, announcements within the station um, that weren't being conveyed through another medium that they could get. So this is what I was talking about, where the UX research is also really neat because it gives insights that we can share with, in this case, the MBTA, to say, and so you have these issues with your website, but you also have these opportunities to use digital technology to improve the overall experience of using transportation. And so that was neat. And just so in that case, as the interviewer, I just let things flow where they were going to flow and tried to get this full context of the experience of transportation versus just really focusing narrowly on, is this button accessible from the keyboard. So that was all very cool, and that was with the MBTA, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that we learned in the course of doing that project. So are there any questions at this point? I'm going to switch over to usability testing that we did. Any questions about the contextual inquiry interviews? So I'm just sort of oh, okay. So a question about whether to see scripts and such, and that's a great question. So I'll dig around and see what I have and definitely share those. They're not in the slides though. Thanks, Gary. Good question. All right, so I think what I'll do is move on to the usability studies and talk a little bit about the logistical aspects of that first. So we did a couple of usability studies, and in this case, they were focused on people who are blind or have low vision. And so the usability studies were a way for us to observe users working through tasks. So they were very scripted, in this case, very scripted. The interviews were much less scripted. And so we'd identify these key tasks and kind of coach the participants through the tasks. And in the course of that, listening, guiding, and asking questions. And so one thing that is really helpful in doing usability studies is always just staying kind of a couple steps ahead of the participant and kind of trying to intuit where they're going and why they're going where they're going, and asking questions along the way. Frankly, a lot of the time we're testing things that have significant issues, and so there is also part of what the role of the moderator is to guide and also back people out when they're stuck and up against a barrier. But really being able to understand the intention behind what people are doing. In some cases, that's sort of through just trying to get inside of their head, but also, asking a lot of questions like what did you expect to have happen, and things like that. And in this case, what we do is we video record the sessions and we take notes. We use video recording instead of sort of screen capture or moray or anything of these things where, the more high-end usability testing setups. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a couple minutes. But what they're good at, on the one hand, for us, is for us to learn different ways that people work, but also in both of these cases, a representative from the client was in the sessions. And so for people who are working in user experience and haven't necessarily done that much testing with people with disabilities, in this case, vision impairments, just really giving people a way to understand how different ways that people work, and obviously identifying accessibility barriers, and it's certainly a very good way to do that. But then also, things that aren't barriers, but just elements in the design that are just cumbersome and difficult to work with, and keep people from having a successful experience and keep people from having an enjoyable experience. And what we do with the results of these tests is we identify usability and accessibility errors or issues, and we are able to report on those in a way that's pretty compelling, partly because we have so much technical know-how, because what TPG does primarily is audits, and we're really, really good at it, if I may say so. And so having that sort of technical know-how and knowledge behind these usability tests, we're able to identify the issues, but we're also able to say, and here is why this is happening, and here are ways that you can fix it. So we don't do a full-blown audit in these cases, but certainly it's not just a matter of reporting the issues. We're also reporting on how to fix them. And also in this case, providing these first-person narratives is just so powerful. So we like to compile a highlights reel for the tests, which is very time-consuming, but it's also a great way to sort of revisit what you observed during the sessions and write it up, and then present something to the client so that they have a way of bringing those perspectives to the team back home. So we like to do that, but in cases where we don't do the highlights video, we weave in quotes and a lot of information from the participants. And overall, they're a great way to just make people aware of, the potential and also the problematic aspects of websites, apps, and web apps. Because in a lot of cases, we're working with people who understand that accessibility is very important and sort of can parse the success criteria, but don't really understand in a kind of fundamental way why it matters. And this is a great way of bringing that understanding out into the world. So the practical insights from this part of the session today, for the usability studies, we've had a great partnership with the Carroll Center for the Blind in Newton, Mass. And so the insight here is to partner with advocacy and support organizations, because I think a lot of times what keeps people from moving forward in testing with people with disabilities is not really knowing how to handle the recruitment aspects and the logistical aspects. And so in this case, the Carroll Center has a technology room. The people who were recruiting have been to the Carroll Center, so they know where it is. They're familiar with the location and how to get there and how to get around. The technology is all there for us to use. And so that's the key for us, I would say, in terms of the success of these studies, was this partnership that we had with the Carroll Center. And the people there are just fantastic. So if you live in the Boston area, I highly recommend working with the Carroll Center. If you live elsewhere in the world, look around for advocacy and support organizations that you can partner with to do these studies. Another just key sort of practical aspect of things is just making sure that people have a way to get to the study location. And so in Boston, it's the ride, which people love and hate, and mostly hate, but I think are happy that it's available. And so just making sure when you're doing your recruiting to ask, how do you plan to get to the Carroll Center? Because for our test, for example, the schedule is very tight. And so we really needed to make sure that people were able to arrive on time so that we could keep things moving. Another thing is just to send documents in advance. So, we have NDAs, we have a video release form, all of these documents that people need to read and sign. You send an accessible version of the document in advance so that people can read it versus having a pile of paper that and asking people to sign without really having the time to read it closely. And bringing a signature guide. This was something that I wasn't aware of prior to doing these tests, but fortunately the Carroll Center had one, and just a signature guide that'll help people who can't see. I'm putting up a picture of a signature guide, and it just is a rectangular shape with a cutout in the middle that you can position over the signature line, and if someone who can't see can feel where the signature needs to go and can sign. So that works well. And another very logistical, practical aspect that the Carroll Center filled in for us is to have a doggy bed available for service dogs. So some of the participants arrived with service dogs, and there was a dog bed, and the dog would lie down in the doggy bed, and the participants sit at the computer, and we would do the test that way. So just be prepared to accommodate companions, maybe dogs, maybe people, and just be prepared to accommodate that. So this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about our approach of using video recording. I think that Mark mentioned earlier the difficulty of trying to capture the experience of using, in this case, a mobile app. I have a couple of screenshots of mobile apps on the slide, and one of them is in the regular, color background combination with black text on a white background, and the other is with inverted colors with a dark background and light text. And when you're trying to use something like Camtasia or something to capture the screen, some of these modifications to the display aren't captured. And so you don't really get a realistic view of what the experience looks like. And especially this is obviously important for people who have some functional vision and are using things like magnification and inverting colors in order to be able to work with the apps or the website. And so here, just in cases of interest, for the mobile testing, what we did is we had the participants use their own device, and we hooked their device up to the display monitor using, I think, an HDMI cable. And so we could see through the display monitor what was being displayed on the device, because also if you're working with people who have very low vision, the device might be right up close to their face, so you might not be able to see very clearly what is displaying. And the shot that we take, Shane Paciello and Kyle Paciello have done the camera work for these, and they've done a great job where they're taking a shot of the participant the device in the case of the mobile testing that we did and the display monitor all in one shot. And so you get this really good sense of the experience. And if that's what you're after, in our case, that's what we're after. We're not looking for data. We're not looking for click, hot spots and all of that. We're really just trying to understand what we can do to improve the user experience. Having that kind of holistic capture of the session and of the experience has proved to be very effective for us. And the issue with the inversion of colors and things like that is, and magnification with zoom text also holds true for when we were testing things on the desktop. And the last practical tip is that the participants all were very positive about engaging in this activity and felt a lot of goodwill toward the company that the companies that were sponsoring these activities. So in this case, here's a quote that says, "I want to thank this company for their willingness to even explore accessibility issues." And another quote, "The fact that this company is doing this exercise makes me optimistic for the future." So the fact that these efforts are appreciated by the participants in and of themselves also is a really good incentive to do this work and to really try to improve user experience overall. So, so that is the end of my 10 practical insights, and now I have 10 design insights to share. But are there any questions at this point about sort of the logistics of things?
Anyone have any questions for Sarah at this juncture? It looks like you can move on, Sarah.
Okay, I'm just going to wait 1 second because it seems like a couple people are typing.
Yep, I think you're right, Malcolm.
Do you think that by going the extra mile got better results from your participants? Do you think that by going the extra mile, you got better results from your participants? So I'm not sure what you mean by going the extra mile, whether you're being very literal, like going to Boston. I certainly believe that being on site rather than doing remote testing is worth it. So I'm not sure if that's your question, but that's a question I'd like to answer. Um, we are ready to do we're ready to do remote testing, but we also believe, I know this isn't the question that you asked, but I'm going to answer it anyway, because I have the microphone, so I get to. So doing the face-to-face testing is so worth it. So whenever possible, if you can do face-to-face usability testing, you're going to learn so much more than you can, especially for the type of studies that we are doing, which are, again, not scientific studies. We're not trying to publish a paper that says that, this many people who use JAWS can do this in this much time. That's not what we're after. So the face-to-face testing is the best. I think I believe that, yes, the question about whether the Carroll Center and the doggy pillow and the signature guide and all of these things, whether those are beneficial, yes, because those are things that are known and comfortable. And so there's enough that is sort of new. So if we're testing a site and new tasks and things like that, then having kind of removing all of the logistical barriers and all of the potential points of confusion and conflict or is a great approach to take, and just it allows us to just really focus on what matters, which is doing the test.
Sarah, I have a question. Do, do you find that if somebody has done testing a user study before it disqualifies them in any way?
That's a great question. Again, I'm very informal about this, and so I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think that it would disqualify anyone. But I also believe that doing a usability study with one person is so worth it. So I think that the key here is to be flexible and not to get too caught up on some of the more scientific rigor and really just go after trying to get as much observational information as you can get. And if that means working with the same person on two studies, you still are so much farther ahead than you were that it's totally worth it. It would be problematic if you were trying to publish a scientific paper, but if what you're trying to do is gain insights and improve the experience, then I don't think it matters.
Thank you. Anyone else have
Yes.
any other questions for Sarah?
Yep. So Marcy mentions coffee and pastries. Food is always good. Yep. Well, I think I better continue on because I want to get through the design insights. So these are things that I've been working in design for many, 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 many years, and just working in accessibility just for 1 year. So I'm a newbie. And when I say like that we are really good at technical stuff, I just sort of squeeze myself in there. But it's the TPG team is the real bulk of that expertise. But the design aspect is what I do have a lot of experience in. And I love doing this UX research because I get these insights that I really wouldn't have understood had I not done the research. And one of them, it just might seem sort of obvious, but I didn't, when I thought about a non-visual experience of an app on a mobile device, I envisioned the interaction mode being primarily a swipe mode. So swiping, sort of like tabbing through all the links on a web page, swiping through all of the content and controls on a mobile app. And what I learned from observing that actually both non-visual and people who have some functional vision but have to really, zoom in or bring the device really close, the location, the spatial aspect of things really comes into play. And if as a designer, if all the designers who are designing apps would be consistent about where they place these controls, people who can't see or have difficulty seeing would only have to use their spatial, their muscle memory, really, to navigate an app. So in this case, you see I have a screenshot of the music app, two screenshots, and they both have the title bar, the navigation bar, and then the tab on the bottom. But the controls that are in those two menus are different. So the mixes on the one of them is a back button on a content under the magnifying glass, so to speak, and relevant content. So one of the people we interviewed would look at the print view and then magnify it using Zoom text. And something just happened in the is everybody still there? No. Okay.
I can hear you, Sarah. I'm not sure what happened with the
Something
screen.
bizarre just happened in my Connect window. Sorry. I'll just pretend nothing happened. I don't know what it was, but as long as everyone's still there. Okay. So, but then, you know, what's interesting about this, it was sort of like I mean, it's not a very pleasant coping strategy, but it worked. But then, you know, these are itineraries, and they have details about a pathway from here to there, and where you need to be and what time things are going to happen. So the fact that zooming in on screen on the print view, that the fact that that's helpful is good, but then printing the print view is totally useless, since the print view doesn't honor the text resizing or zooming. It's just going to print at standard size. So the print in this case with a transportation website, print really matters. Okay.
Sarah, can you share your slides again, because they're not coming through.
Oh, geez. Okay.
We're on the you just need to, I think you just need to, there you go.
Do you see them now?
There you go. Everybody all set now? Yes. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. So everybody's back, right? Okay.
Yes.
So what I was displaying, I'm sorry that you didn't see it while I was talking about it, but this is the print preview of the itinerary from the MBTA website. And so this is a view that people sometimes will use that doesn't have as much clutter as the main view. And then they'll magnify it using Zoom text. All right. So another thing that we learned by watching people is that you don't want to put like really important stuff in the right side of the screen, because when screens are magnified, all of that information is off screen. And so typically, you know, you'll load up a web page, and if you're running Zoom text, let's say, because that's what most people we were testing with were using, the accessibility at the T content was, you know, way off on the right, and probably very rarely encountered by someone using a screen magnification software, probably also screen reader software for that matter, just because of the linearization of the content. And also these important service alerts that really are necessary for people to be able to see. So having all of that kind of crucial information at the right side of the screen isn't a very good idea. Moving it to the left is a better approach and is more likely to be encountered by someone using screen magnification and screen reader software. Another thing that we observed was the difficulty with screen magnification software when websites reset focus. So this is a case, again, I should point out that these sites, like right now Crate and Barrel is up on the screen. We didn't test these. I'm not sharing screens from the sites that we did. menu open, and so the menu has a bit of a shadow underneath it. It has a border around it, but it is also white and overlays the content on the page. And so this is another instance where if you're using a screen magnification software to look at things, you're not necessarily going to know where you are and that there is a menu open. And so designs that make use of background colors and borders and things like that, that really set panels off from one another, do better in this case than designs that rely on things like white space to distinguish elements or this subtle border around the drop-down menu. So it would be quite likely that someone who is using a screen magnification software to work with this page wouldn't realize that there was a menu open and would be very disoriented by this. But if you do use background colors to set off the blocks of things, a lot of designs involve using these sort of panels or tiles, that works better than white space alone. Another thing we found is that when we're working with forms that have predefined values, again, this is just like basic user interface design, but it becomes very keen when you're working with people who have low vision or are blind. The difficulty of managing the input, especially in the case, like, for example, if someone was using dictation for this, but in this case, I type in Harvard Square, Mass for the endpoint of a trip planner. So the start point is South Station, the end point is Harvard Square. And Harvard Square is misspelled, so it's Harvard without the A, well, Harvard Square, okay? And the application that's running behind this knows very well what the options are. It knows that it's Harvard Square or Harvard Square Station or Harvard Road. You know, it's querying a database full of addresses, valid addresses, but the field itself doesn't have any kind of autocorrect. It doesn't have a did you mean? It doesn't have anything like that, and instead has this very long list of options that one would have to navigate in order to find exactly what it wants. So one of the people we interviewed called this part of the MBTA site finicky. And in this case, there's a lot we can do programmatically just to make this interaction easier for everyone. So if we have predefined values, if we know what the values need to be, we have to be able to provide a better UI that would make it not quite so finicky and allow more margin for error, or even just supply the values through some sort of autocomplete option. But I just have to say as a caveat that except on an iPhone with Siri, because when we were doing mobile testing, Siri really won the day in terms of input options. There were drop down menus that people could have access to select from. There are auto fill options, you know, add, you know, fill as you type kind of things that people could select from a list, things that match. Like I'm showing a Google a search for movies in Newington. It's showing me options that I could just point and select. But people who were working with the iPhone and using Siri really use dictation almost exclusively to fill in fields, and that was, it just works beautifully. The other thing we learned doing the mobile testing is that swipe gestures really don't work consistently with VoiceOver, and so this is a screenshot of my Facebook news feed, and I've opened up the chat option by clicking on the control in the upper right corner, and it has a overlay menu that lists all my friends and family who are currently online, and I can't close that overlay using VoiceOver because I can. There's a really kludgy way to do it, but the way the standard interaction would go is just swiping that overlay back, and in this case those swipe gestures simply don't work when you have VoiceOver running, and so that can be a real blocker for people who are using VoiceOver on a lot of levels, actually, because it's not only that it won't close, there's that whole business of content that's not in view being part of the focus order and everything. So swipe gestures are really pretty problematic. This is, yeah, this is actually, I think, further exploration into what I mentioned about the background colors and using screen magnification. So in this case, it's the MBTA site and this site does use a lot of color backgrounds and patterns and snowflakes and things like that to differentiate elements on the screen. And we could have long debates about whether that's a good design choice and good on different other levels. But from the perspective of Zoom, it is very helpful because those colors create those groupings and make those groupings more easier to identify. And then the final one, and this also was sort of a surprise to me, was that that slow loading pages are really problematic, particularly for screen reader users, but also for users who use screen magnification software. So this is the CNN page, and it's loading, and a lot of the content isn't loaded yet because there's a lot of it, and it's coming from lots of different places, and it's just a very heavy page. And so, and here's the page fully loaded with all of the other content, the ads and everything. And so what would happen when we were testing with a page that was heavy in the bandwidth sense was that the screen reader software would often have this lag problem where it was still reading content from the previous page because the new page hadn't fully loaded yet, and the participant would think that they had activated a link, gone to a new page, and they're still hearing content from the previous page. And so in this case, I wouldn't have thought of sort of load time as an accessibility issue, but it really clearly was in the case of this of one project that we worked on. And so again, these are just things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of as accessibility issues, but they clearly were. And looking for these patterns and looking for these things that won't necessarily be part of what we see when we're doing audits, the more that we can bring these together and come up with some sort of heuristics that we could use to talk about accessible user experience, the better overall experience we'll be providing. So just to finish up on that note, this is sort of the equation. This is the accessible user experience equation, which is, you take accessibility and you add it to user experience versus keeping it as something different and other that we do as a after the fact sort of compliance exercise. We bring those together and we say we're talking about user experience, and accessibility is a characteristic of user experience. So we're talking about accessible user experience. And when we talk about things in that way, we're going to get much closer to what we're really looking for, which is a web for everyone. And as some of you may know, there's a book out called A Web for Everyone, which I co-authored with Whitney Quesenbery. So a lot of the guidelines that, I mentioned that we're looking to develop those guidelines. I don't know that we really have figured out all the patterns that are going to make the user experience better. So help us to discover those and use those. And you can follow the book at A Web for Everyone. And that is the end of my presentation. So, yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. That was
Oh,
fantastic. Very useful information. We'd like to open up. We do have a few moments here before our next session for people to post their questions.
So it looks like Mike Paciello has a question. Is it a common issue with swipe and voiceover, or do gestures touch events disrupt voiceover? I believe that if Patrick were online, he would have the answer for you right off the bat. He confirms for me. This is Patrick Lauka, my colleague. He confirms for me that swipe is a problem with voiceover, and that at this stage it just simply doesn't work. And so you have to provide a secondary option. So you can use swipe, you can include a swipe gesture, but you also then need to include a control that will close that overlay. You can't only have the swipe gesture. And let me see. What else? What was the range? Gary asks, what was the range of disabilities that we included? And in the usability testing, we were looking solely at people who have vision impairment, so pretty low vision, some functional vision, but some people were using screen reader and like actually one of the participants used voiceover plus Zoom plus inverted colors. So some people had functional vision, but not very much, and some people had no vision. And in the contextual inquiry interviews, we had a broader range of participants, and it was really interesting in that case too, that there were people who we talked to who I wouldn't have necessarily thought of as having an issue that would affect the use of a website. So one of the participants has MS and had a lot of issues, visual issues, more related to things, having trouble focusing on things. Those tables were really difficult for her because it was just hard to hold things still on the screen with her eyes. There were people in that group who were using screen magnification, using dictation. So people who had limited mobility and dexterity, some participants who are deaf. So the interviews really had a broad range of perspectives that it was very helpful. And let me see, there's a follow-up from Mike, I think. Swipe, yes, swipe is a problem. So swipe being swipe being taking an element that's on the screen and pushing it off screen with your finger. So you should open your Facebook app on your iPhone, Mike, and go to the chat and try to open and close that with your finger, and you swipe the element off of the screen and it goes away. But if you have voiceover running, it won't swipe away. That action just doesn't take place. But the whole single finger swipe through all of the elements, that definitely still works. And all of the other sort of basic gestures. But more and more what we're seeing with apps is these sort of fancy gestures where, there's pull this element up to open and drag it down to close and things like that, that is problematic.